Picture this for just a moment: you're 70 years old, standing at a family table that should be filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of Sunday dinner, when suddenly the very people you raised, the children you sacrificed everything for, turn on you. Not with kindness, not with gratitude, but with cold eyes and sharpened words. They thought they could humiliate me, corner me like a defendant in a courtroom, and shame me into submission. What they didn't know is that age does not make a man weak, it makes him dangerous, because he's lived long enough to stop apologizing. That night, I walked out of their home not in defeat, but in victory, laughing as I set fire to the invisible chains they had been tightening around me for years. They wanted control. Instead, they got a lesson they will never forget. Hello, my beautiful souls, my wonderful friends across the world. My name is David, and this little corner of the internet is where real people share real stories about life, betrayal, heartbreak, and the kind of justice you can actually feel in your bones. If you've just stumbled across this channel for the first time, welcome. You are in for a story that might just stay with you long after you've closed your laptop or put down your phone. Before we dive in, I want you to do something for me. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Are you curled up in a New York apartment while snow falls outside? Maybe you're in a buzzing London cafe, earbuds in, the world rushing past. Or perhaps you're listening from somewhere far away and dreamlike, like Bali or Cape Town or Rio. Wherever you are, I read every single comment, and I can't tell you how much joy it brings me to know these stories connect us across oceans and time zones. And if this story resonates with you, and I believe it will, please hit the thumbs up button, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe so you never miss another journey like this. Because today's tale isn't just about me. It's about anyone who has ever felt underestimated, controlled, or silenced. So grab your coffee, pour your tea, settle into your favorite chair, because what I'm about to share is not just another family squabble, it's a roller coaster of betrayal, awakening, and liberation that ends with the sweetest, most unexpected revenge you've ever heard. My name is David Mitchell, and if you only knew the chapters of my life, you'd understand why this story matters so much. At 70 years old, I carry the scars of decades spent as more than just a man. I was a builder of homes and of lives, a provider who carried the crushing weight of responsibility, a widower who buried the love of his life, and above all else, a father who poured every last ounce of his being into raising 4 children after tragedy struck. When my wife, Margaret, passed far too young, the world expected me to crumble. But I didn't. I picked up a hammer, tightened my belt, and went to work. Day after day, week after week, because my children needed me more than I needed grief. I built a small construction business with my own hands. Calluses turned to scars, sweat turned to aching bones, and every nail driven into wood was another prayer that my kids would have more than I ever did. For years, my life was a pattern of sacrifice. Vacations? I couldn't afford them, not in time, not in money. New suits or fancy cars? I wore old clothes and drove second-hand vehicles while I sent my kids to universities that cost more than I ever dreamed possible. I worked in the blazing heat of July, in the freezing sting of December winds, sometimes 70 hours a week, because I thought that was what love meant. Sacrifice, endlessly, without question. And for a long time, I believed it was enough. My reward, I thought, would be respect. Gratitude. Maybe even companionship in my older years. But the truth, which hit me far too late, was that all those sacrifices became invisible the moment they were no longer convenient. The house where I raised my children, the one I built with my own hands, where every corner echoed with laughter, arguments, birthdays, and Christmas mornings, became too much for me to handle alone. For bedrooms, 2 acres of land, nearly $1.2 million in value now. But value is not measured in dollars, it was measured in memories. The kitchen where I taught Sarah to flip pancakes. The living room where Michael stumbled his first steps. The backyard where Lisa skinned her knees learning to ride a bike, and where Tommy and I built a treehouse that still stood, weathered but proud, like me. But arthritis doesn't care about memories. Empty hallways don't care about history. And a man living alone doesn't need 4 bedrooms echoing with ghosts. So I made a decision that none of them expected. I sold it. I took the proceeds and bought a 2-bedroom condo in a senior community, smaller, easier, safer. A place where neighbors waved in the hallways and life felt lighter. It wasn't just downsizing. It was survival. It was practicality. With the money left, I set aside $600,000, carefully invested so I'd never be a burden, so I could pay for healthcare, emergencies, anything life threw at me. But then, with $200,000 still in my hands, I looked at it and, for the first time in 50 years, didn't ask what my kids needed. I asked what I wanted. And the answer was simple. I wanted to live. For decades I had been the man who stood in the background, watching life happen while carrying everyone else on my shoulders. But with that money, I bought something I had never purchased before, freedom. A chance to see the northern lights with my own eyes, to eat food I couldn't pronounce in Thailand, to walk through ancient temples in Cambodia, to sit on a beach in Tahiti with sand between my toes, not just in my dreams. Not reckless. Not irresponsible. Thought out, intentional, and deserved. Tommy, my youngest, understood. He hugged me and said, "Dad, you've earned this. Go. Live." But the others? They didn't see freedom. They saw a theft. Not of money. Of their inheritance. And that poisonous idea is where the storm began to gather. When I told my children about my plans, their responses revealed everything I had feared, but hadn't wanted to admit. Tommy was the first to react, and his words were like a breath of air in a suffocating room. "Dad, this is amazing. You've sacrificed your entire life for us. You deserve this more than anyone I know. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about finally living." He clasped my shoulder, and for just a moment, I thought maybe all 4 of them would understand. But I was wrong. Sarah's face twisted into a mask of concern that was more about appearances than love. "Dad," she said slowly, as though speaking to a child, "don't you think you're being a bit irresponsible with your money at your age?" The way she lingered on irresponsible made me feel like a reckless teenager instead of a 70-year-old man who had built an empire of sacrifice. Michael, ever the lawyer, sharpened his words like they were knives. "Have you thought about the tax implications of liquidating those assets? Have you factored in long-term care insurance? What happens if you run out of money because of some impulsive world tour? Do you really think that's wise?" His tone wasn't that of a son talking to his father. It was a cross-examining attorney preparing to destroy a witness. And Lisa, my bitter, resentful Lisa, she didn't even mask her contempt. She slammed her coffee cup down so hard the china rattled. "So let me get this straight, Dad. You sell the house we grew up in, our childhood home, without even asking us how we felt about it. And now you're going to blow our inheritance on some midlife crisis vacation." Those words hit harder than any construction accident I'd ever suffered. Our inheritance. Not your money, Dad, not the life you worked for, not even the savings you earned with sweat and sacrifice. No. To them, it was already theirs, as though I were dead and buried. I tried to reason with them, to remind them of all the years, the decades of sacrifices that had already given them more than most children ever receive. College tuition fully paid. Down payments for homes. Weddings funded. Emergency checks quietly slipped into envelopes when they struggled. I reminded them that I had set aside plenty, that when my time finally came, there would still be more than enough. But their eyes told me the truth, they didn't see a father. They saw a bank account with a beating heart. After that conversation, the calls started. Sarah phoned me late at night with that sing-song voice of false compassion. "Dad, are you feeling okay? You've seemed a little off. Maybe you should get checked out, just to be safe." Michael sent me articles about elder financial abuse, as if I were the abuser and the victim rolled into one ridiculous caricature. He framed it as concern, but it was control, dressed up in legal jargon. Lisa didn't bother calling at all. Her silence was louder than any lecture. 3 months passed like that. 3 long months of passive-aggressive comments, being excluded from family barbecues and birthdays, whispers behind my back that I wasn't supposed to hear but always did. The children I had raised with my whole being were treating me like a stranger, or worse, like a liability. But through it all, I didn't cancel my trip. Call it stubbornness, pride, or maybe just survival, but I knew this was my chance. My only chance. And I wasn't about to let their greed or fear strip it away. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. Sarah's voice poured sugar through the line. "Dad, we've been a little harsh. Why don't you come over this Sunday for dinner? Richard is making steaks. Just us, the family, no drama. Let's talk like we used to." I should have recognized the manipulation. But after months of cold shoulders, I wanted to believe in reconciliation. I wanted to believe my children were reaching for me out of love, not out of fear. So I said yes. And in doing so, I walked straight into the trap. Sunday arrived cloaked in gray drizzle, as though even the sky sensed what was coming. The air felt thick, heavy, reluctant to move, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I ironed my best navy shirt, slipped on khakis that still held the faint smell of starch, and strapped on the watch my children had given me on my 65th birthday. I looked in the mirror and tried to summon the image of a man they could still respect. The drive to Sarah's neighborhood took only 20 minutes, but each mile felt longer. Riverside was an enclave of success on display, manicured lawns, polished cars gleaming in 3-car garages, and houses that stood like monuments to wealth. When I pulled into Sarah's circular driveway, I saw the glint of Richard's BMW, Sarah's Mercedes, and their weekend Porsche, all lined up like trophies. The house, though grand and perfect, felt wrong the moment I stepped out of my car. There was no smell of food wafting out, no muffled laughter, no grandchildren running to greet me. Only silence. Sarah opened the door, smiling the way people do when they've already rehearsed it in the mirror. Her black dress was sharp, formal, more boardroom than dining room. "Dad. Right on time. Come in, come in." I kissed her cheek. "You look beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you for inviting me." "Of course, Dad. We're family," she said, leading me through the marble foyer. The house echoed with our footsteps. "Where are Richard and the kids?" I asked. "Richard took them to his mother's. I thought this would be better, just us." Red flag. The children, my grandchildren, were always the joy of these dinners. Their absence wasn't an accident. We stepped into the living room, and there they were. My 3 older children, their spouses, and even Tommy. Though his wife Maria was conspicuously absent. The scene was staged. Lisa sat upright in a scarlet blazer, radiating authority. Michael stood by the fireplace in his lawyer's uniform, dark suit, power tie, looking ready to deliver closing arguments. Jennifer perched on the sofa, her lips pinched into the same disapproving line she always wore around me. Paul, Lisa's husband, looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else. And then there was Tommy. My youngest. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, tension etched into his posture. His eyes darted toward me and then away again, a silent admission that he knew this was wrong but had been dragged into it anyway. "Where's Maria?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer. Tommy cleared his throat. "She had things to do with the kids." A lie. A flimsy one. And for the first time in years, my son couldn't meet my eyes. I looked around at the semicircle they had arranged, and then at the empty armchair positioned perfectly opposite them, like a defendant's chair in a courtroom. "Sit down, Dad," Michael said in his courtroom voice. "We need to talk." I remained standing. "About what, exactly?" "About your recent decisions," Sarah said, gesturing to the empty chair. Lisa added, "We're here because we love you and we're concerned." The word love oozed out of her mouth like syrup masking poison. I laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "All right," I said finally, lowering myself into the chair. I folded my hands on my knees, met each of their eyes one by one, and said, "Then let's get this over with. Say what you came here to say." Michael, always the self-appointed leader, stepped forward first. His folder was already in hand, because of course he had brought evidence to a family dinner. "Dad, we've been discussing your future. And frankly, we don't think you're thinking clearly." "My future," I repeated slowly, letting the words taste bitter in my mouth. "This trip," Sarah said quickly, jumping in before I could answer. "Gallivanting across the world at your age, Dad, it's dangerous, it's reckless. Do you really think this is wise?" "Gallivanting," I echoed. "Interesting choice of word." Lisa leaned forward, voice sharp. "We know you've been lonely since you sold the house." "I sold the house because I couldn't maintain it," I cut in. "It was the practical choice." "Practical?" Michael's tone sharpened. "Do you call spending $200,000 on a fantasy vacation practical? We think it's impulsive. Irresponsible." Jennifer finally spoke, her voice prim and cold. "David, at your age, the focus should be on stability. Security. Not blowing money on indulgences." And that was when I felt it, the slow burn of realization that this wasn't about safety. It wasn't about care. It was about control. I glanced at Tommy, the one who had always been on my side, hoping for support. But he only looked away. The tribunal had spoken. The verdict had already been written. And I, their father, their provider, their sacrifice, was now nothing more than a man on trial in his own family's courtroom. Michael opened his folder like a prosecutor preparing to destroy a witness. Pages shuffled, pens clicked, eyes narrowed. "Dad," he said in that voice of his, the one that sounds like it belongs more in a courtroom than a living room, "we're worried about your judgment. We've documented a pattern. Erratic decisions. Impulsive financial choices. Signs of decline." I stared at him, stunned. "My judgment," I repeated, flat and quiet. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "Dad, no one is saying you're incapable. We just think, maybe you're not considering everything. This trip, this sudden sale of the house, it doesn't feel like you." Lisa pounced, slamming her palm on the arm of her chair. "It feels selfish, Dad. That's the word no one else wants to say. Selfish." There it was. The accusation I had waited a lifetime to hear but had never expected from my own children. "Selfish," I echoed, my voice low. Lisa stood up, her face red with heat. "Do you know what it felt like to drive past our childhood home, the place where every memory we had was rooted, and see a sold sign in the yard? Without even a chance to walk through it one last time. You didn't just sell a house, Dad. You sold our history." I leaned forward slowly, gripping my knees to keep my hands from trembling. "And what about my history, Lisa? Did you ever think of that? Every beam in that house, every shingle, every nail was driven in by my own two hands. Do you know how hard it was for me to sell it? But I did, because I couldn't maintain it anymore. Because I had to think about survival. But not one of you asked how I felt. You only cared about what it meant for you. You didn't consider us," Michael said sharply. "You made a unilateral decision about something that affected the entire family." "It was my house," I said, ice in my voice. "It was our home." Sarah shouted, her voice breaking. "It wasn't just bricks and wood, it was our childhood. And you sold it like it was nothing." I felt something crack deep inside me, something raw and dangerous. Nothing. That house meant everything to me. That's why I built it, why I worked myself into the ground to keep it. But do you know what else I realized? Memories don't live in houses. They live in people. And right now, the people I built that house for are treating me like a fool. The silence was sharp enough to cut. Lisa folded her arms, her jaw tight. You've only thought about yourself lately. This trip, this new condo, this so-called adventure, it's all about you. For once in your life, you're not sacrificing. You're just indulging. My chest burned. My heart pounded like a drum. I looked around at the four faces staring at me, and something inside me snapped. Indulging, I repeated. You want to know about indulgence? Indulgence is what you've had your entire lives. Name brand clothes while I wore patched up jeans. Fancy universities while I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day for 10 years. Down payments for houses while I lived without vacations, without rest, without dreams. No one asked you to do that, Lisa said coldly. And that was it. The moment that broke me. No one asked me. My voice rose, shaking the walls. No one asked me to work double shifts while your mother was sick. No one asked me to come home with bloody hands and aching bones so I could put food on the table. No one asked me to give up dating, companionship, another chance at love, because I thought you needed a father who was fully there. You're right, Lisa. No one asked me. I chose to do it because I loved you. Because I believe that's what a good father does. And do you know what I see now? I looked each of them in the eye, slowly, deliberately. I see four entitled, ungrateful adults who think their 70-year-old father's desire to finally live his own life is a crime against them. That's not fair, Sarah whispered, tears forming. Fair. I laughed, but it was sharp, bitter, humorless. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been you picking up the phone just once to ask how I was doing, not how my investments were performing. Fair would have been hearing congratulations when I told you I was finally going to see the Northern Lights, not lectures about my mental competence. Fair would have been support, not suspicion. But you don't care about fairness. You care about control. You care about inheritance. The room fell into stunned silence. Even Paul, usually invisible, sat frozen, his face pale. And then I realized something I should have known long ago. They didn't see me as a man, or even a father. They saw me as a resource. A wallet. A safety net. And that realization was more devastating than any insult, any accusation, any silence. Just when I thought the worst of it had been said, Michael cleared his throat and reached for his briefcase. Because of course he had a briefcase, this was never just dinner, it was a trial. He pulled out a thick stack of papers and laid them deliberately on the coffee table, fanning them out like evidence. Dad, he said, his voice calm but cutting, since you refuse to see reason, we've prepared something to help you understand. I felt my stomach drop. What is this? Documentation, Michael replied. Examples of your recent erratic behavior. Questionable decisions. Signs of decline. Decline. My voice was barely a whisper. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes soft with false pity. Dad, it's only because we care. We've been keeping track of things, for your protection. For my protection, I repeated slowly, tasting the words like poison. Michael flipped through the papers. The impulsive sale of the family home without proper consultation. The extravagant world tour planned without medical or financial advisement. Your increasing social isolation since moving to the senior condo. I laughed, but it was hollow, sharp. Social isolation? You mean the isolation caused by my own children cutting me off for 3 months? That kind of isolation? Jennifer chimed in, lips pursed. And there was the grocery store incident. What incident? I snapped. Lisa's voice was smug. When you became confused in the checkout line and raised your voice at the cashier. I stared in disbelief. Confused? There were 2 express lanes with conflicting signs. I asked which was open, then moved to the right line. That's confusion. That's evidence. You raised your voice, Sarah said gently, like she was talking to a child. I spoke loudly so I could be heard over the noise. That's not confusion, that's basic communication. Michael continued, his tone steady, clinical. We've also received reports that you've been oversharing personal family business with strangers at the senior center. Those aren't strangers. I shouted, standing up. They're my neighbors. They're my friends. Do you hear yourselves? You're criminalizing me for having conversations about my own life. Even as the words left my mouth, I realized the truth. They weren't building a family discussion. They were building a legal case. Michael, I said, my voice low, dangerous, what exactly do you plan to do with those papers? He exchanged a glance with Sarah and Lisa before answering. Dad, we've consulted a geriatric psychiatrist, Dr. Patricia Hendricks. She specializes in cases like this. Cases like what? Elder cognitive decline with impaired judgment and impulsive behavior, he read, as though reciting from a diagnosis. My knees went weak. I sank back into the chair, not from age, but from shock. You've already been to a psychiatrist about me? Without me? Lisa folded her arms. We needed professional guidance. We couldn't just sit by and watch you self-destruct. I'm your father, not a case file. I roared. Dad, please calm down, Tommy said quietly, his voice tinged with something that broke me more than Michael's legalese or Lisa's venom. Pity. My youngest son looked at me with pity. Stay calm. I barked. You ambush me, accuse me of incompetence, and build a case behind my back, and you want me calm? See? Sarah said quickly, looking to her siblings as though proving a point. This is exactly what Dr. Hendricks described. Emotional volatility. Volatility? I spat. You're surprised I'm angry after you've spent months plotting against me? That's not volatility, that's humanity. Michael placed a hand on the stack of papers like a priest on a Bible. Dad, we want you to voluntarily undergo a competency evaluation. If you pass, fine. If not, we'll have to take the next step. I narrowed my eyes. And what's the next step? Silence stretched across the room like a knife edge. Finally, Michael said the words that shattered whatever was left of my heart, then we'll be forced to pursue legal guardianship. The air left the room. My ears rang. Guardianship. Guardianship, I repeated slowly. So you want to strip me of my rights? Control my finances. Decide where I live, what I eat, whether or not I can leave the country. Just until you get the help you need, Lisa said quickly. The help I need, I repeated, standing again, my voice rising like a storm. And who decides what help I need? You. The psychiatrist you hired behind my back. The same children who can't even look at me without calculating their inheritance. It's not about money, Sarah insisted, but her voice wavered. Isn't it? I thundered. Because from where I stand, every concern you've raised leads back to the same place, your wallets. You don't want a father. You want a managed asset. Jennifer, emboldened, spoke up. David, this isn't adversarial. It's responsible. At your age, happiness is a luxury. Security is the necessity. I turned to her slowly, my chest heaving. Happiness is not a luxury. Happiness is life itself. And if you can't see that, then you've never truly lived a day in your life. The silence that followed was heavier than any I'd ever endured. My children's faces blurred together, fear, pity, greed, denial. And in that suffocating silence, something remarkable happened. I stopped caring. I stopped caring about their approval, their inheritance, their opinions about my sanity. Because in that moment, I understood the truth, they didn't see me anymore. Not really. And if they couldn't see me, then I was finally free to stop living for their vision of me. I laughed. Low at first, then louder. Startling them. Genuine laughter, from deep inside my chest. "Dad?" Tommy asked, uncertain. "You've just given me the greatest gift," I said, wiping my eyes. "You've freed me from the guilt of being your father. I've spent 70 years giving everything to you. Now, I'll spend what years I have left giving something to myself." And for the first time in decades, I felt alive. I stood in the center of Sarah's immaculate living room, the white leather couches gleaming under the chandelier, the marble floor echoing my every word. My children sat frozen, caught somewhere between outrage and fear, and for the first time in years, I didn't see them as my babies. I saw them as adversaries. As jailers who had mistaken my patience for weakness. "You want to control me," I said slowly, my voice carrying the weight of decades. "You want to decide where I go, how I live, what I do with the money I bled for. But let me tell you something, those days are over." Lisa crossed her arms tightly, trying to regain ground. "Dad, don't be dramatic. We're only trying to protect you from yourself." "Protect me?" I laughed, the sound ringing sharp in the air. "I've survived construction sites in the burning heat and freezing snow. I've raised 4 children alone after burying the love of my life. I've stared down debts that would cripple most men. Do you really think I need protecting from a plane ticket and a suitcase?" Michael lifted a hand as if calming a witness. "Dad, this doesn't have to be adversarial. It already is." I roared. "You ambushed me, you spied on me, you catalogued my every move like detectives building a case. You don't see me as a father anymore. You see me as a liability." Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears. "That's not true. Isn't it?" I snapped. "Because if it weren't, you would have hugged me when I told you I was going to see the Northern Lights. You would have cheered when I said I'd finally booked the safari I'd dreamed of since I was 20. Instead, you looked at me like I was sick. Like I was broken. Like joy was proof of insanity." The words hung heavy. No one answered. I stepped closer to them, one by one, making eye contact. "Do you know what it feels like to give everything, and be told it wasn't enough? To realize that the people you sacrificed for see you not as a man but as a bank account with legs? Do you?" No answer. Just silence. "Let me make it simple for you," I said, my voice steady now, no longer shouting but sharper than a blade. "I am 70 years old. I have earned every dollar in my name, every scar on my hands, every wrinkle on my face. I've earned the right to decide how to spend my final decades. And here's my decision: I will not let your fears shrink me. I will not let your greed chain me. I will not let your pity define me." Tommy shifted, guilt written across his face. "Dad, please, don't walk out angry." I turned to him, the son I had hoped would be different. My voice softened. "I'm not walking out angry, Tommy. I'm walking out free." And then, like a spark catching fire, I started laughing. Not the bitter, broken laugh of a man beaten down. No. This was the full-bodied laughter of someone who had been carrying the world on his shoulders for decades and had finally set it down. "Dad?" Sarah asked cautiously, like I'd lost my mind. I shook my head, still chuckling. "Do you realize what you've done tonight? You've unchained me. For years, I lived with guilt, the guilt of sacrificing too much, of being too strict, of not remarrying, of maybe not doing enough. Tonight, you showed me the truth. You'll never see it as enough. And if it's never enough, then I'm free to stop trying." The room went still. My children, these grown adults who thought they could bully their father into submission, looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Not pity. Not superiority. Fear. Because they finally understood, they had no power over me anymore. I walked toward the door slowly, deliberately, savoring each step like it was the first walk of my new life. At the threshold, I turned back, hand on the knob, my laughter fading into a smile. Pursue guardianship if you want, I said evenly. By the time you file your papers, I'll be sipping champagne in Paris, watching the sunrise from the Eiffel Tower. And if that sounds like the choice of a crazy man, then I guess I'd rather be crazy and free than sane and shackled. I opened the door. Cool night air rushed in, washing over me like baptism. "Dad, wait," Sarah cried, tears streaming. I looked back one last time. No more waiting. Not for me. Not ever again. And with that, I stepped into the night, closed the door behind me, and walked out laughing like a man who had finally remembered how to breathe. As I drove away from Sarah's mansion that night, the drizzle on the windshield felt different, lighter somehow, like the sky itself was cleansing me. The streetlights glowed brighter, the hum of the engine sounded steadier, and even the radio, playing some old Motown song, felt like it was singing directly to me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just going home, I was driving toward the rest of my life. When I stepped into my condo, the air felt charged, alive, like the walls themselves had been waiting for me to arrive as this new version of myself. I didn't collapse into bed, defeated. No, I poured myself a glass of wine, opened the balcony doors, and let the night breeze wash over me. And then, with a grin spreading across my face, I picked up the phone. "Helen," I said when my travel agent answered, "are you sitting down?" There was a pause, then her cheerful voice, "David. Of course, what can I do for you? Is everything okay with the trip?" "Helen," I said, laughing, "everything is better than okay. I want to upgrade everything. Flights, hotels, tours, the works. First class, 5-star, once in a lifetime. If there's a more luxurious option, book it." She chuckled nervously. "David, you realize that will significantly increase the cost." "Helen," I said firmly, "I'm 70 years old, I've spent 4 decades sacrificing every dream I ever had, and I've finally remembered that money is a tool, not a shackle. I'm more certain about this than I've ever been about anything. Upgrade it all." There was a long pause, and then I heard her smile through the phone. "Well then, let's plan the trip of a lifetime." We spent nearly 2 hours reworking my itinerary. A private villa in Santorini with a chef. A first-class train car through the Swiss Alps. A safari lodge with its own airstrip in Kenya. A 5-star resort in Bali with a private beach. By the time we hung up, my 6-month trip had grown into an 8-month odyssey costing nearly $300,000. And for the first time in my life, I felt zero guilt. The next morning, I woke up early, brewed fresh coffee, and sat on the balcony overlooking the garden. The sunlight seemed sharper, the world brighter, like I was finally tuned to the right frequency. I didn't feel old. I didn't feel tired. I felt alive. But I knew there was work to do. The first call was to my bank. "Mr. Mitchell," my financial advisor said cautiously after I explained, "that's a significant withdrawal. Are you sure this is wise?" "Robert," I interrupted calmly, "do you think I've lost my mind?" "No, of course not. Do you think I'm competent to make my own financial decisions?" "Yes, but..." "Then transfer the money and stop questioning me. I've been managing money longer than you've been alive. I think I can handle it for 8 more months." Silence, then a resigned, "Yes, sir. I'll arrange everything today." The second call was to my doctor. "Doc," I said when he answered, "I need a complete physical, every vaccination known to man, and a medical file I can carry around the globe. I'm going on the adventure of a lifetime, and I want to be prepared for anything." "David, that's wonderful," he said, delighted. "When are you leaving?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks. He chuckled. "That's not much time, but we'll make it work." "You sound different, David." Energized. "I am different, document. I'm finally living." But the third call was the hardest. I dialed Tommy. Dad?" His voice was hesitant, as though bracing for an explosion. "Son, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest." "Okay. Do you really think I'm losing my mind?" Silence. Then a sigh. "Dad. I don't think you're crazy. I think you're changing. And that scares me." "Why?" "Because you're not acting like the father I've always known. You're acting like you don't need us anymore." And there it was. The truth behind all their fear. "Tommy, I love you. I'll always love you. But you're right, I don't need you the way I used to. And that's not a tragedy, son. That's what parenting is supposed to lead to. Independence. Freedom. You don't raise children so they can keep you in a cage. But what if something happens to you? Then it happens. And you'll grieve, and you'll go on, because I raised you to be strong enough. But son, let me tell you something important. Sacrifice without boundaries isn't love, it's martyrdom. And martyrs don't raise grateful children. They raise guilty ones." There was silence. Then, softly, "I'm proud of you, Dad." Those words nearly undid me. "Thank you, son. That's all I needed." From that day on, the next 3 weeks flew by in a blur of preparation. Doctor visits. Shopping for gear. Learning phrases in 6 new languages. Practicing with a brand new camera. I joined online travel groups, chatted with other adventurers my age, and filled notebooks with plans. But more than logistics, I was preparing my spirit. I wrote letters. 4 of them. To Sarah, Michael, and Lisa, I wrote, "I love you. I will always love you. But I will no longer let your fear cage me. You wanted safety, I want life. Thank you for pushing me into freedom. By the way, check your bank accounts, I've already gifted you part of your inheritance. Don't worry about what I spend on myself. I've earned it." And to Tommy, I wrote, "You are my executor, my power of attorney, and the one child who saw me as a man, not a liability. Don't repeat my mistakes. Love fully. Live fully. And don't you dare sacrifice yourself into resentment like I did." I mailed the letters the day before departure, timed so they'd arrive once I was already gone. That final night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the stars overhead shimmering like an invitation. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't doubtful. For the first time in 70 years, I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted, ready to live a life that was mine. Friends, let me tell you something about traveling the world at 70. It doesn't erase the years on your body, but it paints new life into your soul. Every sunrise I watched, every culture I stepped into, every stranger who became a friend, they stitched pieces of me back together that I hadn't even realized were torn. My first stop was London. The moment I stepped off the plane at Heathrow, I felt like I had crossed an invisible threshold. The air smelled of rain and old stone, the kind of air that carries history. My taxi driver, Winston, a chatty Jamaican fellow with stories about every corner of the city, grinned at me in the rearview mirror when I told him I was on an adventure. "At your age?" he asked with a wink. "At any age," I replied. And for the first time, I believed it. London unfolded like a gift. I wasn't rushing through landmarks just to tick boxes. I lingered. I savored. I sipped tea at the Savoy with an elderly couple from Yorkshire who treated me like family within 5 minutes. I spent hours lost in the British Museum, wandering from mummies to marbles, talking with a retired Oxford professor who explained history with the passion of a man who still loved his subject. I watched a street violinist in Covent Garden and ended up spending an entire afternoon hearing his tales of busking across Europe. But the moment that changed everything happened on my 3rd morning. I was sitting in a tiny Notting Hill cafe, enjoying eggs and black coffee while reading a travel guide, when a woman's voice asked, "Excuse me, are you traveling alone?" I looked up, and there she was. Elizabeth Hartwell. 68 years old, silver hair framing a face both elegant and kind, blue eyes that sparkled like she carried secrets worth discovering. She was dressed casually but with that effortless style that said she understood both books and life. I said, standing to greet her as my mother taught me. David Mitchell, from the United States. She shook my hand firmly. Elizabeth. Born here in London, but I've been living out of a suitcase for 3 years. Mind if I join you? It's always nice to meet a fellow wanderer. That breakfast turned into a day, and that day turned into a revelation. Elizabeth had been a literature professor at Cambridge, widowed 5 years earlier. After 2 years of grief, she sold everything and set out to see the world. I realized, she said as we walked through Kensington Gardens, that I had spent my whole life preparing to live, studying, teaching, raising children, being a wife. But I had never actually lived. Does that make sense? More sense than you know, I said, and for the first time in my life, I told my story without shame. The family dinner, the accusations, the walkout, the decision to put myself first. She listened carefully, without judgment, then smiled. David, what you've just described isn't madness. It's freedom. You've stepped into the life you were always meant to live. By dinner that night, we had decided something outrageous. Where are you going next? I asked. Norway, she said. To see the northern lights. Perfect, I said. That's my dream too. What do you say we go together? She laughed, eyes alight. I think we just became travel partners. And so, my solo adventure became something even greater. In Norway, we stayed in a glass igloo resort north of the Arctic Circle. On our third night, the sky erupted in ribbons of green, purple, and blue light that shimmered and danced as if the universe itself was celebrating us. We stood in the snow, holding hands like teenagers, breath visible in the frozen air. How did we live this long without seeing this, she whispered. Because we were too busy living for everyone else, I replied. From Norway, we flew to Kenya, where the savannah stretched forever. We rose before dawn for safaris, watching lions stalk their prey, elephants bathing with their calves, zebras galloping across golden plains. One morning, we soared in a hot air balloon over the Serengeti as the sun spilled fire across the horizon. That evening, in a Maasai village, I danced with warriors whose joy was as fierce as their traditions. In Thailand, we learned to cook spicy curries from a Bangkok family, their laughter filling the kitchen. We floated down the Mekong, stopping at temples where saffron-robed monks smiled knowingly at us. We stayed in a floating bungalow, rocking gently to sleep under a ceiling of unfamiliar stars. Elizabeth and I were no longer just traveling. We were awakening. From there, Japan. Kyoto, with its serene temples and whispering bamboo forests. We stayed in a monastery, rising before dawn to meditate with monks. One morning, I sat alone in the garden, dew on the mossy stones, and felt tears slide down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from the astonishing realization that I had no responsibilities to anyone but myself. For the first time since I was a boy, I was simply David. Not dad, not provider, not problem solver. Just a man breathing in the morning air. Elizabeth found me, worried. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, I whispered. For the first time in my life, everything's right. In New Zealand, I jumped out of an airplane. Yes, at 70. 60 seconds of freefall, wind roaring in my ears, earth rushing up to meet me. Terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly necessary. When the parachute opened and I floated down, gazing at mountains that looked carved by gods, I laughed harder than I had in decades. Why would you do that at your age? The instructor asked later. Because I spent 70 years being safe, I told him. And I wanted to find out what living really feels like. In Australia, we snorkeled in the Great Barrier Reef, swimming among colors too vivid for words. We tried surfing in Byron Bay, Elizabeth better than me, though we both tumbled into the waves laughing. In Fiji, we stayed in an overwater bungalow where the ocean rocked us to sleep. Villagers invited us into their homes, sharing kava, songs, and stories. For once, I wasn't giving, I was receiving. In Tahiti, we learned the stars. Ancient navigators taught us to read the ocean by waves and constellations, and for the first time I realized how small and beautiful our lives are in the vast sea of existence. In Chile, while hiking Patagonia, Elizabeth slipped and sprained her ankle. As I held her hand waiting for help, fear tore through me, but not the fear of obligation. It was love. Pure, simple love. David, she said later in Santiago, foot elevated, eyes locked on mine. I think I'm falling in love with you. I smiled through tears. I think I'm falling in love with you too. And if that's crazy at our age, then I never want to be sane again. By the time we reached Bali, our last stop, I knew. I knelt in the sand at sunset and asked her to marry me. David Mitchell, she laughed through tears, you're out of your mind. But yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Let's be gloriously insane together. 3 days later, we stood barefoot on a beach, a Buddhist monk blessing us, the sky painted with fire. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't planned. It was perfect. And for the first time since Margaret passed away decades earlier, I felt whole. Friends, adventure gave me my life back. Love made it worth keeping. Friends, after 8 months of circumnavigating the globe, after London, Norway, Kenya, Thailand, Japan, New Zealand, Fiji, Chile, Bali, I finally touched down in my hometown. But the man who returned wasn't the same widower who had left. That man had been weary, bent beneath decades of sacrifice. The man stepping into the arrival's terminal was sun-kissed, confident, and walking beside a woman who had helped him rediscover life. Elizabeth and I wheeled our luggage, chatting about where we might put the art and textiles we'd shipped home, when I saw them. All 4 of my children. Sarah. Michael. Lisa. Tommy. And their spouses. Standing in a row like a welcoming committee, or perhaps a jury waiting to deliver a verdict. At first, panic seized me. Had something happened? Was someone ill? Or worse, were they about to stage yet another intervention? But as we approached, I noticed something different. Their faces weren't tight with judgment. They weren't looking at me like a reckless old man. Instead, there was hesitation, nervousness, and, astonishingly, something like respect. Tommy stepped forward first. His voice cracked a little as he said, "Dad, welcome home. You look incredible." And maybe I did. Months of adventure had reshaped me. My shoulders were straighter. My eyes brighter. My body fitter from hiking mountains and swimming reefs. I looked, and felt, younger than I had in decades. "Thank you, son," I said warmly. "I feel incredible." Then I placed an arm around Elizabeth. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my wife." The word wife hit them like thunder. Sarah's mouth literally fell open. "Wife?" "Yes," I said, grinning. "We married 3 weeks ago on a beach in Bali." "Elizabeth, these are my children." Elizabeth, full of grace, stepped forward with a radiant smile. "What an honor to finally meet you. David has told me so much about each of you. I've been looking forward to this." For a moment, silence. Then, bless him, Tommy extended his hand. "Welcome to the family, Elizabeth. Dad looks happier than I've ever seen him, and that says more than anything." She shook his hand warmly. "Thank you, Tommy. Your father is a remarkable man." Sarah cleared her throat. "Dad, could we talk privately?" I glanced at Elizabeth, who squeezed my hand. "Go ahead," she said gently. "I'll sort the luggage." Tommy interjected. "No, Elizabeth should come too. She's family now." I could have kissed my youngest son. We stepped into a quieter corner of the airport, and my children shuffled awkwardly. For once, they didn't look like prosecutors ready to interrogate. They looked like children about to admit guilt. Sarah spoke first. "Dad, we owe you an apology. All of us. The way we treated you before you left, it was wrong. Completely wrong." Michael added, "We were so focused on what we thought you should do that we never stopped to ask what you wanted to do. We treated you like you were incompetent when really, we were just afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked softly. Lisa's eyes shimmered. "Afraid of losing you. Afraid of change. Afraid that if you didn't need us anymore, maybe you wouldn't want us anymore." And just like that, my anger melted into something unexpected, compassion. "You know," I said slowly, 8 months ago, I would have accepted your apologies, told you everything was fine, and gone right back to being the father who never asked for anything. But I'm not that man anymore." Their hopeful faces faltered. "The man you see standing here is someone who has spent 8 months learning who he is when he's not busy being your father. And I have a few things to say." I looked each of them in the eye. "First, apologies accepted. But they don't erase what happened. You treated me as a burden, not a person. That changed me." They shifted uncomfortably, but stayed silent. "Second, I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need permission to spend my money, live my life, or choose my happiness. That era is over." Michael opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Third, if you want a relationship with me going forward, it will be on new terms. I am not your safety net, your emergency fund, or your retirement plan. I am a man who intends to live fully until the day I die." Lisa's tears spilled. "Dad, we want that relationship. A real one. Then you must understand, Elizabeth and I are a package deal. We're going to travel, take risks, do crazy things. If that unsettles you, that's your problem to solve, not mine." Elizabeth, ever graceful, spoke then. "Your father never stopped loving you. Even when he was hurt, he spoke of you with pride. I hope you can come to see him as I see him, a man still capable of wonder, joy, and love." For the first time, I saw recognition in their eyes. Tommy smiled. "Dad, I think that's the healthiest thing you've ever said." Sarah, wiping tears, asked, "Do you forgive us?" I thought hard. "I understand you. You were afraid, and fear makes people controlling. But forgiveness is a process, not a switch. Show me over the next 6 months that you've learned, that you celebrate my happiness instead of fearing it. Then ask me again." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the truth. As we turned to collect our luggage, Tommy pulled out his phone. "We wanted to show you something." He held up a photo of himself, Maria, and their kids in front of the Eiffel Tower. "You inspired us, Dad. We finally took the trip to Europe we've been putting off. And it was the best thing we've ever done as a family." Sarah showed me another photo, a beautifully decorated room, a banner stretched across it that read, "Welcome home, world traveler." "We've thrown you a party," she said with a shaky smile. "Your neighbors, your friends, even Helen your travel agent. We wanted to celebrate your courage." I was stunned. "You threw me a party?" "We realized that instead of trying to stop you from chasing your dreams, we should have been celebrating that our father was brave enough to chase them," Michael admitted. Elizabeth whispered, "David, that's beautiful." As we left the airport, I realized something profound. I hadn't just changed. My transformation had forced them to change too. That night, Sarah's house overflowed with neighbors, friends, family. Balloons, food, laughter. People hugged me, toasted me, demanded stories. I told them about the Northern Lights, about lions in Kenya, about skydiving in New Zealand. I spoke not just of places, but of lessons. I discovered, I told the crowd, that I am braver than I thought. More adaptable than I believed. and more capable of love than I ever imagined. Elizabeth stood beside me, eyes shining. I discovered a man who embraces life with the courage of someone half his age. A man I'm honored to call my husband. Applause shook the walls. Later, sitting on Sarah's back porch with Tommy and Maria, I was asked, "Dad, are you still angry with us?" I thought carefully. I was angry. Hurt. Disappointed. But I've learned something: anger is just love that has nowhere to go. Tonight, seeing how you've changed, I realized the love was always there. It just got tangled in fear. Now, I choose hope. Hope that we can move forward as a family of adults, not a parent and dependents. And as Elizabeth and I drove back to my condo that night, I realized, this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the end of the beginning. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't living someone else's version of me. I was living as myself. And tomorrow I would begin again. That night, after the welcome home party finally wound down, Elizabeth and I drove back to my condo. For the first time in months, I was pulling into a familiar driveway, but it didn't feel like the place I had left behind. It felt new. Reclaimed. As we rode the elevator up, Elizabeth leaned against me and whispered, "Are you happy to be back, Mr. Mitchell?" I smiled, surprising myself with the answer. Yes. For the first time, this feels like home. Not because it's permanent, but because it's a choice. I'm here because I want to be, not because I have nowhere else to go. When we stepped inside, I looked around at the condo that had once felt small and lonely. Now, with Elizabeth by my side, it looked full of possibility. The walls seemed to breathe. The rooms felt alive. This place could use a woman's touch, Elizabeth teased, brushing her hand along the back of the sofa. Then let's make it ours, I said. Paint it, fill it with the treasures we brought back, let it reflect both of us. No more museum of who I used to be. She smiled. I liked the sound of that. We opened a bottle of champagne I had been saving for a special occasion. We clinked glasses on the balcony, the city lights glittering below like 1,000 unspoken promises. "So what's next?" she asked. I laughed. "Oh, I have ideas. I was thinking we spend a few months here, introduce you to the community, maybe take some local classes, enjoy the quiet for a while. But after that?" "After that?" she pressed, eyes twinkling. "After that, I thought maybe a cruise through the Mediterranean. The Greek islands in spring, the Amalfi Coast, maybe even Istanbul. What do you think, Mrs. Mitchell?" She laughed, a sound that always reminded me of bells. "I think I married a madman with a passport, and I wouldn't have it any other way." We stood there in comfortable silence, sipping champagne, watching the stars. I thought back to the man I had been less than a year ago, tired, burdened, defined entirely by sacrifice. And then I thought about the man I was now, 70 years old, newly married, world-traveled, and finally free to choose joy without apology. "You know," I said softly, "for most of my life, I thought the best parts were behind me. But I think I was wrong. Maybe the best parts are just beginning." Elizabeth took my hand. "Then let's begin together." Friends, that's the lesson I want to leave you with tonight. Life doesn't come with an expiration date on joy. Happiness doesn't retire at 65. Adventure isn't reserved for the young. It took me 70 years to understand that living for everyone else isn't living, it's waiting. And the truth is, you don't need anyone's permission to start. You don't need approval. You just need courage. So if you've been waiting for a sign to chase that dream, to book that trip, to make that change, let this be it. Because tomorrow isn't promised. But today is a gift. And me? I intend to keep unwrapping it every single day. This isn't the end of my story, friends. This is only the end of the beginning. The rest, well, the rest is waiting out there, just beyond the horizon.